The sight of her was like a punch to the gut, clarifying the story he had been told, that Clara's horses had perished in the fire that had taken her life. His heart pounded, both with joy and fear as he approached the other two, his hands shaking as he untied their sacks. The sorrel stallion, Buck, appeared next, his proud head streaked with a faint starburst, his coat faded from years of neglect but still carrying the strength Clara had loved. Then Shadow, the black gelding, appeared, his intelligent eyes looking at Elijah with a gleam of recognition. All three of Clara's horses, stolen from the ashes of that terrible night, stood in his stable now, their presence a silent indictment of the lie he had lived with for 15 years. Elijah's chest ached with a pain he thought he had buried, but also with a burning desire to know the truth. Who had taken them? And if the horses were alive, then what else about that night was a lie? The morning sun barely crested the jagged hills of the Wyoming frontier, casting a pale gold glow over Elijah Holt's weathered ranch when three horses stood like ghosts in the dust, burlap sacks tied tight over their heads. Elijah, a grizzled rancher of 60 winters, leaned against the splintered fence post of his corral, his calloused hands gripping the wood as if it could anchor the unease churning in his gut. The sacks were crude, stained with dirt and frayed at the edges, giving the horses the look of condemned souls awaiting judgment, a sight that stirred something deep and troubling in Elijah's heart. He'd seen plenty in his years on this unforgiving land. Stampedes, droughts, men broken by greed or whiskey, but nothing like this. The trader, Toby Wheeler, a wiry young drifter with a face too sharp for trust, stood by his creaking wagon, spitting tobacco juice into the dry earth. His clothes reeked of stale liquor and desperation, the kind that clung to men who'd gambled away their futures and were now peddling whatever they could to scrape by. "Why the sacks?" Elijah asked, his voice low and rough, like gravel under a boot. Toby's eyes flicked away, landing on some distant point where the horizon blurred into haze. "Spooked real bad," he muttered, wiping his mouth with a grimy sleeve. "Won't settle without 'em. Been that way since I got 'em from the last fella." His words came too quick, like a man reciting a story he hadn't rehearsed well enough. Elijah's gaze shifted to the horses, and his chest tightened at the sight of the middle one, a sturdy mare with a dappled coat, her legs marked with a faint scar that curved like a half-moon just above her hoof. It was a mark he hadn't seen in 15 years, not since the fire that took his sister Clara and everything else he'd ever held dear. The memory hit him like a winter wind. Clara's laugh as she brushed her mare Daisy in this very corral, her voice singing hymns while the horses nickered softly. That was before the smoke, before the ash, before the sheriff told him Clara and her horses had burned in a barn fire, leaving Elijah to bury what was left of his family and his hope. He stepped closer to the wagon, his boots crunching on the hard-packed dirt, every instinct screaming to walk away. But that scar, that damn scar, held him like a chain. "What happened to him?" he pressed, his voice sharper now, though his heart pounded with a fear he couldn't name. Toby shifted, his fingers drumming nervously against his thigh. "Rustlers," he said, too fast. "Whole ranch got hit, burned to the ground. These three were the only ones left. Owner didn't make it." The words spilled out like water from a cracked bucket, and Elijah caught the twitch in Toby's jaw, the way his eyes wouldn't meet his own. 15 years of reading men, drifters, traitors, liars, had taught Elijah to spot a story that didn't add up. The mare stomped once, her movement sharp and restless, and as she turned, Elijah glimpsed another detail under the sack's edge, a patch of white fur, crescent-shaped just like Daisy's. His breath caught, and his knees buckled for a moment, forcing him to grip the fence harder. It couldn't be. Daisy was gone, burned with Clara's other horses, Buck and Shadow, in the fire that turned his world to cinders. He'd seen the charred remains of the barn, smelled the acrid smoke that lingered for weeks. But that scar, that marking, it was like seeing Clara's ghost standing before him, demanding he listen. "How much?" The words slipped out before Elijah could stop them, raw and urgent, as if some deeper force had spoken through him. Toby's eyes lit up, a predator's gleam, like he'd just snagged a prize he hadn't dared hope for. "Well now, these ain't your average horses," he said, his voice slick as oil. "Strong stock, trained real good. Say $250 for the lot." $250 was more than Elijah had spent in a decade. It was enough to mend his sagging roof, buy seed for next spring, maybe even hire a hand to help with the cattle. But logic had no place here, not when that crescent mark was pulling at memories he'd buried so deep he'd almost convinced himself they were dreams. "I'll take 'em," he said, the words heavy on his tongue like a vow he couldn't break. Toby's hand shook as he untied the horses from the wagon, whether from excitement or fear Elijah couldn't tell. The drifter's movements were quick, too quick, like a man eager to outrun his own shadow. As he led the horses to Elijah's corral, Toby kept glancing over his shoulder, scanning the hills as if expecting trouble to ride in with the dust. "You sure you don't want their names?" Toby asked, securing the last rope, his voice carrying a note of hope that Elijah would say no. "I'll figure that out myself," Elijah replied, pulling bills from his worn leather wallet. Each $20 note felt like a piece of his soul, hard-earned from years of scraping by on this lonely ranch. The moment the money changed hands, Toby's posture shifted, the tension in his shoulders melting away like snow in spring. He climbed onto his wagon with the speed of a man shedding a burden, calling back as he snapped the reins. "One more thing. Don't take them sacks off right away. Let 'em settle a day or two." Before Elijah could ask why, the wagon was rolling away, kicking up a cloud of dust that swallowed Toby's figure faster than seemed necessary for a man with nowhere to be. Elijah stood alone in the corral, the 3 horses now his, their hooded heads still and silent, like statues guarding secrets he wasn't sure he wanted to know. The mare with the crescent scar stood slightly apart, her stance achingly familiar, as if she remembered this corral from a life long gone. The other 2, a bay stallion and a black gelding, bore signs of neglect, their coats dull, old rope burns scarring their legs where they'd been tied too tight for too long. But it was the mare that held Elijah's gaze, her hidden eyes pulling at a wound he'd spent 15 years trying to close. He thought of Clara, her gentle hands braiding Daisy's mane, her dreams of breeding a bloodline that would make their ranch famous. She'd been 25, full of fire and faith when the flames took her. Elijah had been out checking fences that day, miles away, and by the time he'd seen the smoke and raced back, there was nothing left but ashes and a grief that never faded. The sheriff, Amos Caldwell, had called it an accident, a lantern knocked over in the barn. Elijah had believed him, too broken to question it, too lost to see the lie in Caldwell's cold gray eyes. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, painting the sky in hues of amber and blue, Elijah's thoughts were interrupted by the creak of a wagon approaching. Old man Jenkins, his neighbor of 30 years, rolled up in his rickety cart, his white beard catching the light like frost. Jenkins, a retired blacksmith pushing 70, had a knack for showing up when Elijah least expected it, always with a story or a warning wrapped in his gruff voice. "Strange sight, them horses with sacks," Jenkins said, squinting from his seat. "Reminds me of tales from years back. Horses stolen, ranches burned, folks left with nothing. You watch yourself, Elijah. Things like that don't happen by chance." His words hung heavy, stirring the unease in Elijah's chest. Jenkins didn't stay long, just tipped his hat and rolled off, but his warning lingered like smoke. Elijah turned back to the horses, his heart a tangle of grief and curiosity. The mare shifted, and a low nicker escaped her, muffled by the sack but piercing enough to make Elijah's throat tighten. He thought of the nights he'd sat by Clara's grave, a simple wooden cross on a hill a mile from the ranch, whispering apologies for not being there when she needed him. He'd spent 15 years believing the horses were gone, that Clara's dreams had died with her. But now, standing here, he felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope, fragile as a new foal, but real. He approached the mare, his hands trembling as he reached for the rope tying her sack. "Easy, girl," he whispered, his voice soft as a prayer, the way Clara used to speak to her horses. The knot was tight, deliberately so, as if someone wanted to keep the truth hidden. As he worked it loose, the burlap shifted, and Elijah braced himself, knowing that whatever lay beneath would change everything he thought he knew about the past. The ranch was silent save for the wind whistling through the hills, and in that moment, Elijah Holt felt the weight of 15 years pressing down, waiting to be lifted. Elijah Holt stood frozen in the corral, his breath catching as the burlap sack slipped from the mare's head, revealing a pair of eyes, one brown, one startling blue, that pierced through 15 years of buried grief. It was Daisy, Clara's prized mare, unmistakably alive, her crescent-shaped scar glinting in the Wyoming sun like a beacon from a past Elijah had tried to forget. His knees buckled, and he gripped the corral fence to steady himself, the rough wood biting into his palms. Daisy's gaze held him, steady and knowing, as if she too remembered the nights Clara brushed her mane, singing hymns under the starlit sky. The sight of her was a punch to the gut, unraveling the story he'd been told, that Clara's horses had perished in the fire that took her life. His heart pounded, a mix of joy and dread, as he moved to the other two horses, his hands trembling as he untied their sacks. The bay stallion, Buck, emerged next, his proud head marked by a faint star-shaped blaze, his coat dulled by years of neglect but still carrying the strength Clara had so loved. Then came Shadow, the black gelding, his intelligent eyes scanning Elijah with a flicker of recognition. All three of Clara's horses, stolen from the ashes of that terrible night, now stood in his corral, their presence a silent accusation against the lie he'd lived with for 15 years. Elijah's chest ached with a grief he thought he'd buried, but also with a burning need to know the truth. Who had taken them? And if the horses had survived, what else about that night had been a lie? He stumbled back to the ranch house, his boots heavy on the dusty path, and climbed the creaking ladder to the attic where he kept Clara's things. Things he hadn't touched in years, too raw with pain. The attic smelled of old wood and faded dreams, and there, in a dusty trunk, he found a letter in Clara's neat handwriting, folded inside a leather-bound Bible. His fingers shook as he unfolded it, the paper brittle with age. "Elijah," it began, "if you're reading this, something's gone wrong. Sheriff Caldwell's been sniffing around the horses, saying they're too fine for a small ranch like ours. He offered to buy Daisy last week, but I said no. He didn't take it well. I don't trust him, Elijah. If anything happens to me, look to him." The words hit like a rifle shot, shattering the fragile peace Elijah had built. Clara had known something was wrong, had sensed the danger, and he'd been too far away, checking fences miles out to protect her. Guilt clawed at him, sharp as barbed wire, and he clutched the letter, his eyes stinging with tears he hadn't shed since her funeral. The sound of hoofbeats broke his reverie, pulling him back to the present. He stepped onto the porch, squinting against the midday sun, and saw a rider approaching. A woman, sitting tall in the saddle with the ease of someone born to it. Her dark hair was streaked with gray, pulled back under a worn hat, and her face carried the lines of a life lived hard. She dismounted with a fluid grace, her boots kicking up dust as she approached. "Elijah Holt?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with an old pain. He nodded, his hand instinctively resting near the rifle propped by the door. "Depends who's asking." She studied him, her eyes sharp and calculating, like a hawk sizing up its prey. "Hannah Grayson," she said, and the name hit Elijah like a thunderclap. Hannah, Clara's best friend, the woman who'd stood by her side through every roundup, every dream of building a legacy with those horses. Hannah had vanished after Clara's funeral, leaving only whispers of her grief, and Elijah had searched for her, hoping to share the weight of their loss. But she'd been gone like smoke on the wind. "I thought you were—" Elijah's voice trailed off, the words too heavy to finish. "Dead?" Hannah's lips curved in a bitter smile. "I might as well have been, but I'm here now, Elijah, because I've been tracking those horses." She nodded toward the corral where Daisy, Buck, and Shadow stood, their heads uncovered, their eyes catching the light. "I knew they were alive 6 months ago when I saw Daisy's scar in a trader's lot down in Colorado. I've been following their trail ever since, and it leads straight to Sheriff Amos Caldwell." The name from Clara's letter sent a chill down Elijah's spine, and he felt the world tilt beneath him. "Caldwell?" he growled, his voice thick with accusation. "The man who told me Clara knocked over a lantern? That her horses burned with her?" Hannah's eyes darkened, and she stepped closer, her hand resting on the pistol at her hip. "Caldwell's been running a horse theft ring for years, Elijah. He targets ranches like yours and Clara's, takes the best stock, burns the evidence, and plays the hero when families come crying. I didn't know for sure until I found Caleb Dunn, a deputy who worked for him. Caleb's got proof, a ledger with every ranch he hit, every horse he stole." Elijah's mind raced, piecing together fragments of the past. Caldwell's cold gray eyes at Clara's funeral, his quick dismissal of the fire as an accident, the way he'd closed the case in 3 days flat. It had all felt wrong, but Elijah had been too broken to question it. Now, with Clara's letter in his hand and Hannah's words ringing in his ears, rage simmered in his chest, a fire that had smoldered for 15 years. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, his voice sharp with betrayal. "You knew they were alive, and you left me thinking—" Hannah cut him off, her own voice cracking. "I didn't know until 6 months ago, Elijah. I've been running from this pain as long as you have. Clara was my family too." For a moment her composure faltered, and Elijah saw the grief she'd carried, the same weight that had bent his own shoulders. They stood in silence, the wind whistling through the hills, the horses nickering softly in the corral as if sensing the storm brewing within their humans. That evening, Elijah rode into town, Clara's letter tucked inside his coat, Hannah at his side. The town of Bitter Creek was a cluster of weathered buildings, their wooden facades bleached by sun and wind. The saloon glowed with lamplight, and Elijah pushed through the swinging doors, Hannah close behind. The room fell quiet as eyes turned to them, whispers rippling through the crowd. At the bar stood Mary Beth, a widowed seamstress in her 60s, her kind eyes softening when she saw Elijah. She'd known Clara, had sewn her dresses and shared her dreams, and now she crossed the room, her hands clasped in front of her. "Elijah, it's been too long," she said, her voice warm but tinged with sorrow. "I heard you got some horses today. Strange ones, folks say." Elijah nodded, his throat tight. "They're Clara's, Mary Beth. Daisy, Buck, and Shadow. They didn't die in that fire." Her eyes widened and she reached out, touching his arm. "Oh, Elijah, how—" Her words faltered, but her touch was a comfort, a reminder of the community that had once held him and Clara close. The saloon doors swung open again, and Sheriff Amos Caldwell strode in, his star glinting on his vest, his belly straining against his shirt. He was bigger than Elijah remembered, but those gray eyes were the same, cold, calculating, hiding a lie. "Well now, Elijah Holt," Caldwell drawled, his voice dripping with false warmth. "Heard you've got some new horses. Mind if I take a look?" The crowd parted as Elijah stepped forward, his jaw tight. "They're Clara's horses, Sheriff. The ones you said burned 15 years ago." A murmur ran through the room, and Caldwell's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he recovered, chuckling. "That's a mighty big claim, Holt. You got proof?" Hannah stepped up, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "We've got more than proof, Caldwell. We've got a witness. Caleb Dunn's ready to talk, and he's got a ledger that names you." The saloon went dead silent, and Elijah saw fear flicker in Caldwell's eyes, quickly masked by a grin. "Careful, Miss Grayson," he said, his tone low and dangerous. "Accusations like that can get folks hurt." As they rode back to the ranch under a sky bruised with twilight, Elijah's mind churned with Clara's letter, Hannah's revelations, and Mary Beth's quiet support. The horses were more than animals. They were Clara's legacy, proof of a crime that had stolen his sister and his hope. In the corral, Daisy lifted her head, her blue eye catching the last light, and Elijah felt a resolve harden within him. He'd spent 15 years running from the pain, but now, with Hannah by his side and Clara's truth in his hands, he was ready to fight. Somewhere out there, Caleb Dunn held the key to bringing Caldwell down, and Elijah would find him, no matter the cost. The shadows of the past were closing in, and Elijah Holt was done hiding. The Wyoming sky churned with black clouds as a storm rolled in from the west, its thunder rumbling like a warning across Elijah Holt's ranch. Rain began to fall, cold and sharp, as Elijah stood in the corral, his eyes fixed on Daisy, Buck, and Shadow, their coats slick with wet, their ears twitching at the growing roar of hoofbeats cresting the hill. Sheriff Amos Caldwell was coming, his star glinting through the downpour, flanked by 5 deputies with hard faces and hands resting on holstered pistols. Elijah's heart pounded, a mix of rage and fear, as he gripped his rifle, its barrel cold against his palm. Clara's letter, tucked inside his coat, felt heavier than the storm itself, its words burning in his mind. Caldwell had threatened her, stolen her horses, and likely taken her life. Now, he was here to bury the truth again, and Elijah knew this was the reckoning he'd been running from for 15 years. Beside him, Hannah Grayson stood steady, her pistol drawn, her gray-streaked hair plastered to her face by the rain. "They found us," she said, her voice low but fierce. "Caldwell must have heard about Caleb's ledger." The air crackled with tension, the horses stamping nervously in the corral, as if they too sensed the fight coming. Elijah's gaze locked on Daisy, her blue eye gleaming through the storm, and he felt Clara's presence, urging him to stand tall. Caldwell reined in his horse, his bulk looming even larger in the rain, his gray eyes scanning the corral where the horses stood exposed, their distinctive markings unmistakable. "Well, Elijah Holt," he called, his voice carrying over the wind. "Seems you've got some stolen property there. Those horses belong to a rancher down south. I'm here to take 'em back." His tone was smooth, but his face paled when he saw Daisy's crescent scar, Buck's star blaze, and Shadow's proud stance. Elijah stepped forward, rain streaming down his weathered face, his rifle raised. "They're Clara's horses, Caldwell. You lied about the fire. You lied about her death." The deputies spread out, their hands twitching toward their guns, but Hannah moved faster, her pistol trained on the nearest man. "Funny thing, Sheriff," she said, her voice cutting through the storm. "Caleb Dunn's got a ledger that says you stole these horses the night you killed Clara, and he's ready to testify." Caldwell's smile was a cold, predatory thing, but Elijah saw the flicker of fear in his eyes. "You're making a mistake, Miss Grayson," Caldwell said. "Accusing a lawman without proof is a dangerous game." Before Elijah could respond, a crack of lightning illuminated the ranch and the horses reared in the corral, their hooves slamming against the gate. Daisy, as if driven by some ancient loyalty, brought her front hooves down hard on the latch, and the gate swung open with a groan. The 3 horses bolted into the open yard, not toward the hills as Elijah expected, but straight at the deputies, their hooves thundering through the mud. Daisy charged the nearest man, a stranger with a scar across his cheek, and sent him sprawling, his gun flying into the rain-soaked dirt. Buck and Shadow followed, scattering the others, their movements a blur of power and defiance. Elijah's heart swelled with pride and grief, seeing Clara's spirit in their courage, her love for these animals alive in their fight. "Go!" Hannah shouted, diving toward the barn for cover as bullets began to fly. Elijah ducked behind a water trough, the wood splintering under a hail of gunfire, and returned fire, his rifle barking twice. One deputy fell, clutching his leg, but the odds were grim. 4 men plus Caldwell against 2, with the horses now vulnerable in the open. Rain pounded harder, turning the yard to muck as Elijah's shots grew desperate. His ammunition was low and Caldwell's men were closing in, their gunfire relentless. Hannah, from the barn, fired with deadly precision, her years of tracking honing her aim. She'd learned to shoot somewhere in the 15 years since Clara's death, and she was damn good. Another deputy dropped, his shoulder bloodied. "You should have walked away, Holt," Caldwell roared from behind the ranch house, his voice thick with rage. "Now you and those horses are mine." Elijah's blood boiled, the memory of Clara's laugh, her dreams, fueling him. He risked a glance over the trough and saw a deputy creeping toward the corral, aiming to use the horses as leverage. Before Elijah could shoot, Daisy wheeled around, her eyes wild, and charged the man, knocking him flat. The sight of Clara's mare fighting for him brought tears to Elijah's eyes, mixing with the rain. He couldn't lose them again. Not Daisy, not Clara's legacy. Hannah seized the moment, sprinting from the barn toward the ranch house, her pistol blazing. One shot caught Caldwell in the arm, spinning him against the wall, his own shot going wild into the storm. Elijah abandoned his empty rifle, his rage a living thing, and charged the last deputy, a younger man with fear in his eyes. They hit the ground hard, rolling in the mud, Elijah's fists pounding as 15 years of grief poured out. The deputy was stronger, but Elijah's fury was a force of its own, and he pinned the man's arms, gasping for breath. Hannah appeared above them, her pistol steady. "Enough," she said, and the deputy went limp, surrendering. The yard was chaos. 3 deputies down, one groaning in the mud, and Caldwell slumped against the house, clutching his wounded arm, his face twisted with hatred. "You think this changes anything?" he spat, blood seeping through his fingers. "I've got men, money. I'll hunt you down." Hannah crouched beside him, her pistol unwavering, and pulled Caleb Dunn's leather ledger from her saddlebag, its pages thick with damning evidence. "You're wrong, Amos," she said, her voice steady despite the storm. "This ledger lists every ranch you burned, every horse you stole, every life you ruined, including Clara Holt's." She flipped to a page marked with Clara's name, dates, and sketches of Daisy, Buck, and Shadow. "Caleb saw you that night. Saw you shoot Clara when she tried to stop you. Saw you drag her body to the well and set the fire to cover it." Caldwell's face drained of color, his bravado crumbling. "Caleb's a liar," he growled, but his voice shook. "Not anymore," Hannah said. "He wrote it all down, made copies, sent them to judges in 3 counties. You're done." The storm seemed to pause, the rain softening, as Caldwell's shoulders sagged, defeat settling over him like a shroud. As dawn broke, the storm cleared, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink. Elijah stood at Clara's grave, a mile from the ranch, the wooden cross weathered but still bearing her name. Hannah stood beside him, her hand gentle on his shoulder, while Mary Beth, who'd ridden out at first light, stood nearby, her eyes soft with shared sorrow. They'd returned from the territorial capital the day before, where Caldwell had confessed to save his neck from the noose, his empire of lies exposed by Caleb's ledger. Word was spreading to other towns, ranches long thought lost to accidents now seeking justice. "Clara would have been proud," Mary Beth said, nodding toward the corral where Daisy, Buck, and Shadow grazed, their coats catching the morning light. "The way they fought for you, like they knew." Elijah knelt, touching the earth above Clara's grave, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner, Clara. You deserved better." Hannah's voice was soft but firm. "You couldn't have known, Elijah. Caldwell was too good at hiding his tracks. But we got him now. Mary Beth stepped closer, her presence a quiet comfort. "This ranch could use a woman's touch," she said, a tentative smile breaking through. "And those horses need someone who knows Clara's ways." Elijah looked at her, then at Hannah, who nodded, her eyes holding a flicker of hope. "I'm tired of running, Elijah," Hannah said. "Clara would want us to keep her dream alive." In the corral, Daisy lifted her head, her blue eye catching the sun, the scar above it a reminder of the night everything changed. Elijah felt a knot loosen in his chest, a weight of loneliness lifting. He thought of Clara's laugh, her faith in second chances, and for the first time in 15 years, he believed in them too. As they walked back to the ranch house, the horses nickered softly, their sound a promise of healing, a whisper of Clara's love, carrying them into a new day. The story of Elijah Holt and the three horses with hooded eyes resonates deeply, weaving a tale of grief, resilience, and the pursuit of truth in the rugged American West. As an older American, I find its emotional depth profoundly moving, reflecting the universal struggle to find closure after loss. Elijah's journey, haunted by his sister Clara's death, mirrors the pain many of us carry from past tragedies, losses that linger like shadows. His discovery of Daisy, Buck, and Shadow, horses thought long dead, stirs a powerful reminder that the past can resurface, offering both pain and healing. The courage Elijah and Hannah show in confronting Sheriff Caldwell, despite overwhelming odds, speaks to the strength we can find in facing buried truths, no matter how daunting. Their bond, forged through shared grief, underscores the value of community and connection, especially in later years when loneliness can feel like a constant companion. The horse's loyalty, charging into danger to protect Elijah, reflects the enduring power of love and legacy, a lesson that hits home for those of us who cherish family ties, even across generations. The story teaches us that healing is possible, even decades later, if we dare to seek the truth and lean on others. In our own lives, we can apply this by confronting unresolved pain, whether it's a family secret, a regret, or a wrong we've let fester. Like Elijah, we can find strength in community, whether it's a friend like Hannah or a neighbor like Mary Beth, reminding us that we're never truly alone. For older Americans, this story encourages us to reflect on our legacies, to mend broken ties, and to fight for justice, no matter how late it feels. It's a call to embrace hope, to believe that second chances exist, and to honor those we've lost by living fully in the present. If this story of courage, truth, and redemption touched your heart, hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with friends and family who love a good Western tale or need a reminder of hope's power. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that stir the soul, and drop a comment below. Tell us what lessons you took from Elijah's journey or how it moved you. Your engagement keeps these stories alive, so let's keep the conversation going.